Got a question in from a viewer. Christina asks, can you make a video on how to use the Sony ZV-E10 for IG Reels? Should we film vertically with the camera? And then she went on to share how she did it accidentally horizontally. Well, this is a great question, Christina. Let's get right into it. So we know the orientation for our phones is obviously vertical. Now, that's not to say that you can't use a setting or you can't use those horizontal videos like you're looking at right now on YouTube on IG Reels or even something like TikTok or YouTube Shorts. But you do limit sometimes a little bit of the capabilities of what you're doing. Now, here's the fun fact. You really don't have to make too many changes when it comes to your content in order for you to film on TikTok. What I would suggest though, for most creators, unless you choose to do something different, which is film in 30 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, or you should see this sometimes on some cameras as 60. On your ZV-E10, you'll see this as 1/60th. It looks like a fraction. Your ISO is going to be based on the lighting environment that you're in, how bright or dark it is, if you're outside, indoors, whatever. So that's going to fluctuate a bit. And then for the aperture, if you want a blurry background, it's the number that has the F on it, based on the lens that you have, like I'm using the Sigma 16, you want to take that as low as the lens can go. And then that's going to make your screen brighter. So adjust your ISO, don't let it fluctuate. So when you look down here, the reason why I say the ISO depends is you now see that this number is flashing, telling us that this overall image is overexposed or it's a bit too bright. So what we would then do is adjust the ISO and bring that down until we get something that's a little more neutral of what we're trying to do. I like to stay at a plus 0.7. So I'm actually going to bring that down a little bit more. So just like a 1.0 or 0 plus 0.7 is kind of where I like to be, depending on how low the aperture actually is on the camera. But this is without an actual person in it. So let's switch over to what that looks like when you actually enter the frame, and why you actually want to increase this just a little bit more for when you actually enter the frame. So once I actually enter the frame, that's the settings that I want to be looking at or paying attention to make sure that I actually look good, especially if you have on darker clothes. And you would adjust it even if you have on like a white shirt, so that the white shirt doesn't look like you bought it from heaven or something like that. So since I'm in the frame, what I would prefer to do is just adjust the ISO and bring that up a smidge, just to make sure it's where I personally want to be for the brightness that I think we would need in the videos. So in your camera, what this looks like, we are now set to 24 and then that's 60, whatever your camera may be set to, f3.5 for the aperture here. And we have the ISO at 640. Otherwise, it could be okay. There's not necessarily wrong with it, but there are some rules that we're breaking here, which is to make sure that this number we're set to 30 and then make to this number set to 160. The way we do that, go into your menu. If you followed the way that I show you how to set up your camera, then you'll have some settings already locked in. Here's where you select between 4K and 1080p. And then here is where you select between 24, and we can move that to 30 frames per second. Then hit menu. And now we see this is at 30, this is at 60. If you need to change this number down here, just go ahead and adjust it as such. Now, once that's there, this number will come back to in a second, but the ISO, we adjusted that a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring this aperture number down. This dial up here would do that. Sorry if I'm shaking the tripod a little too much, but just bring that down as low as the lens can go. That number is based on the lens. So we got the Sigma 16 on here. So that's an f1.4. Now you see that this ISO is fluctuating because it's set to automatic. We don't want that. So we can bring this to whatever we want. You see that's at a plus 1.7. We can bring that down a little bit more to get that plus 0.7, but those would be those basic settings of how that would work. The other thing is, if you're using something like a kit lens, you're not going to get the shallow depth of field or the blurry background. So at lowest, you're going to get an f3.5. Now, those are baseline settings. The reason why I say go for 30 frames per second, most of these platforms, kind of like how when it was like in 2020, everybody's doing a bunch of live streaming. Most social platforms and stuff use 30 frames per second. Can they accept the other ones? Yes. But if you want to kind of help with smoothness and just make sure it's very clear, it's just sometimes add a little bit more to it. 30 frames per second looks really good. Now, we don't change in my business. We don't change from the 24 that we usually shoot on. So instead of the shutter speed being 1/60th, we switch that to 1/50th since we're shooting in 24 frames per second. If you don't know what any of that means, I highly encourage you to check out the video coming up on that information card right now, where I go through and break down all of those different settings, the terminologies, how they impact you. So it's a good video to go watch if you're not familiar with any of this stuff. So check it out. Now let me help save some of your footage if you're recording horizontally. Now, it's not that you can't repurpose that content, you just don't have as much headroom. If we just chopped off the sides of this video and went vertical, as long as I'm a little bit of a distance back, I can still make that work. And the reason is because I'm recording in 4K. So don't use 1080p in my recommendations. Don't use 1080p, use 4K, because you're going to need to stretch your video out some. And when you're recording in lower resolutions like 720p, like some live streaming platforms may suggest or offer, or 1080p, which is not bad, it just is not as crisp as 4K. It doesn't make sense to kind of stretch out when you only have a little bit. It's kind of like putting water in cereal because you don't have enough milk. We're not about that struggle life out here in these digital streets. So we're not putting water to dilute the milk. We're going to just add more milk, in a very simple explanation. So when you shoot in 4K, the other benefit of this is that when you post to IG, when you post that video to TikTok, all of these different platforms have different compression rates, meaning it's kind of like they're squeezing and condensing the footage down so that they can fit as much as everybody wants to upload. And in order to save the file and make sure that you look as good on your phone as you're investing in this camera gear and all of this stuff, so that you look good, that's why you want to record in 4K. And it's going to make sure that your video files can survive the compression of any rate of the social platforms. So you can use your horizontal videos. I just would encourage you to record in 4K instead of 1080p. Now, if you flip it and you go vertical, makes things a whole lot interesting. Now, with everything being the same, I've went ahead and just rotated the camera into a vertical orientation. Now, why would you want to do this? Because if you're recording vertically, you get a bit more headroom, and you can also like maybe use a wider lens, sit further back, or move your camera a little bit further away so that you can sometimes still punch in. We still kind of make the same editing changes on social media content that we do in our YouTube videos, add text on screen. And that's especially important for me when I'm doing my camera skits. So what you shoot, so I shoot 4K 30, 1080p, 120 frames per second. AM50, so whatever orientation that your original content is coming from, because we even do this with live streams, I just try to prepare and make sure I'm a little bit further back, and knowing that I'm pretty much going to fill the frame, and I'm okay with that. It just becomes a preference on, do you want to really fill up the screen, or do you want more of the scene in the shot? Then switching to vertical can be a bit more helpful. But either way, I'm still going to record in 4K. That rhymed. So there's really no secret when it comes to camera settings and the like. The biggest secret honestly would just be recording in 4K to survive the compression. Anytime we've ever tried posting in 1080p, it just winds up looking mushy, and I can't see us all investing thousands of dollars, whether that be in courses, gear, and just the time watching and learning from videos like this, to post something on whatever platform you're posting to and it look mushy. I just think it's a waste of time and money. So shoot in 4K, even when it's micro content. And if you're still confused about the camera settings, there's a video coming up right now where I dive into all of that. I would highly recommend that you go through that. Right now, it's coming up on the screen.